The hiss of steam was a dying breath against the immense, bruised sky. Dust, fine as ground bone, swirled on the wind, coating Eliza's tongue and stinging her eyes as she watched the train shrink into a black splinter on the horizon. It was the last link to a life that no longer existed, a world of green lawns and predictable rain. And with its departure, a silence so profound fell over the landscape that she could hear the frantic beat of her own heart. He was not here. Daniel was not here. The platform was empty save for her, her two trunks containing the entirety of her worldly possessions, and a lone figure leaning against the far wall of the desolate station house. The wind was a physical thing, a bully that tore at the pins in her hair and pressed the fabric of her traveling dress cruelly against her cold skin. It carried the scent of sage and something wilder, something lonely. This was not the promised land from Daniel's letters, filled with descriptions of fertile soil and a sky so blue it hurt the eyes. This was a raw, unfinished world, and she was utterly, terrifyingly alone within it. Her hope, a fragile bird she had cupped in her hands for the entire 3-day journey, had been crushed the moment the train shuddered to a halt, and Daniel's face was not among the few that dotted the barren expanse. She approached the station house, her steps unsteady on the rough-hewn planks. The station master, a man with a face like dried leather and eyes the color of faded denim, barely looked up from his ledger. "He ain't here, missus," he stated, not asked. The words were flat, devoid of pity. Been and gone. A cold dread, far colder than the wind, seeped into Eliza's bones. Gone? But he told me to come. He sent the ticket. Her voice was thin, a thread about to snap. The man finally lifted his gaze, and in it, she saw a weary contempt for the foolish hopes of women like her. Sold his claim 'bout 3 weeks past. Said he was headin' for the gold fields in California. Took the morning train west the same day. He didn't mention no wife. Each word was a hammer blow, dismantling the architecture of her future. Sold the claim. California. Did not mention a wife. The station master's pronouncement hung in the air, absolute and final. She felt the blood drain from her face, the world tilting on a precarious axis. She had left her family, her home, everything she had ever known, for a man who had discarded her as easily as an old coat. The despair was a physical weight, pressing down on her chest, making it impossible to draw a full breath. She turned away from the man's dismissive gaze, her own fixed on the unforgiving plains that stretched into infinity. The stakes were no longer about building a home. They were about surviving the next hour. Out of the corner of her eye, she was aware of the other man, the one who had been watching. He had not moved. He was just a shape, still and silent as the landscape itself, a witness to her complete and utter unraveling. The setting sun bled across the clouds, painting them in violent shades of orange and purple, a beautiful, terrible omen of the night to come. The station master locked the door with a decisive clank of metal. The sound echoed in the vast emptiness, a final punctuation mark on her abandonment. "Can't stay here," he grunted, not looking at her as he shuffled past, his form swallowed by the encroaching twilight. She was left alone with her trunks and the rising moan of the wind. Night fell not with grace, but like a predator, swift and cold. Stars began to prick the indigo velvet of the sky, distant and indifferent. Eliza sank onto the lid of her largest trunk, the wood hard and unyielding beneath her. She wrapped her arms around herself, a futile defense against the chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. Tears she had refused to shed now froze on her cheeks. There was nowhere to go, no one to turn to. She was a ghost, haunting the place where her life was supposed to have begun. Then a sound, the soft scuff of a boot on gravel. She tensed, her fear a sharp, metallic taste in her mouth. The silent observer was moving. He approached not directly, but in a slow, wide arc, as if giving a frightened animal space. He was tall, built of lean muscle and sinew, his features shadowed by the brim of a worn hat. He stopped a respectful 10 feet from her. He said nothing for a long moment, simply stood there, his presence a solid anchor in the swirling darkness. When he finally moved again, it was to unstrap a thick wool blanket from the back of his saddle. He held it out. It was a simple gesture, yet it felt monumental. Eliza stared at the offered blanket, then at his face. She could see him more clearly now in the starlight. His face was weathered, carved by sun and wind, his eyes deep-set and serious. There was no pity in them, but something else. A quiet understanding, perhaps, a recognition of hardship. She hesitated, the ingrained warnings of a woman alone warring with the desperate, biting cold. Her trembling gave her no choice. With stiff fingers, she reached out and took it. The wool was coarse and smelled of horse and wood smoke, a scent as honest as the earth itself. "Thank you," she whispered, the words stolen by the wind. He gave a short, single nod. He then set about gathering dried brush and twigs with an economy of motion that spoke of long practice. He built a small fire, carefully, deliberately, shielding the nascent flame with his body until it caught and held, a small orb of defiant warmth in the immense cold. He settled on his heels on the far side of the fire, placing the gentle, flickering light between them. He did not try to speak, did not ask her story or offer his own. He simply shared his fire, his silence a strange and unexpected comfort. Eliza pulled the heavy blanket around her shoulders, the warmth seeping slowly into her chilled body. She watched him across the flames. His hands, resting on his knees, were calloused and capable. He was a part of this harsh landscape, not a victim of it. And in his quiet, unassuming presence, a tiny, fragile seed of trust, one she thought had been irrevocably destroyed, began to stir in the barren soil of her despair. She did not know his name or his intentions, but he had offered her warmth when the world had offered her nothing but a locked door. For now that was enough. The night deepened, and with it, the wind's voice changed. It rose from a mournful moan to a high, vicious shriek. It carried a new, sharper bite, and soon, the first flakes of snow began to dance in the firelight, white specters in the darkness. At first, they were few, melting as they touched the ground. But their number grew with an alarming speed, swirling into a thick, hypnotic vortex. This was not the gentle snow of her memory. This was a sudden, violent assault. The fire, which had been a beacon of hope, now hissed and sputtered, its small circle of light shrinking as the blizzard descended in earnest. The world beyond the firelight dissolved into a churning wall of white. The man Silas, she had heard the station master use the name in a brief exchange hours earlier, rose to his feet. His quiet stillness was replaced by a tense urgency. He looked at the station, a dark, unyielding shape, then at the sky, then at her. The blizzard was no longer a threat. It was a cage, closing in around them. "We have to move," he said, his voice low but clear over the howl of the wind. "This won't last. We'll freeze before morning." Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through Eliza's numbness. He was right. The blanket was a comfort, but it would be no match for the fury of this storm. Her trunks, filled with linens and dresses for a life she would never have, were useless anchors. Where? The question was a wisp of breath, nearly lost. "My cabin. It's a ways from here. But we can make it if we leave now." He was already moving toward his horse, his actions fluid and decisive. The animal stood stoically, its coat already dusted with white. He checked the saddle, his movements economical and sure. He was preparing to fight this, to survive, and he was including her in that fight. The choice was stark. Trust a stranger and walk into a blizzard, or stay here and certainly perish. There was no choice at all. She stood, her legs stiff and clumsy, the heavy blanket clutched around her. The snow was accumulating rapidly, burying the tracks they had made, erasing the world. Silas brought the horse over, its warm breath misting in the frigid air. "You'll ride," he commanded, not unkindly. "I'll lead." He looked at her trunks, then back at her face, a silent acknowledgement of the life she was being forced to abandon. There was no time. He laced his fingers together to give her a step up. His grip was firm, steadying. As she settled into the saddle, awkward and afraid, he pulled the blanket more securely around her, his touch impersonal yet protective. "Hold on tight," he said, and his hand briefly brushed her own. It was a fleeting contact, but it sent a shock of warmth through her glove. He took the reins, his back to the wind, and leaned into the storm. The fire was already gone, swallowed by the white chaos. They were two small figures against an elemental rage, bound together by the simple, desperate will to live. The journey into the heart of the blizzard was a terrifying blur of white. Eliza could see nothing but Silas's broad back, a dark, unmoving shape against the blinding snow. She bowed her head, trusting him to navigate a world that had ceased to exist. The journey was a waking nightmare, a battle fought in a world of screaming wind and suffocating whiteness. Time lost all meaning. There was only the rhythmic plodding of the horse, the solid presence of the man leading them, and the relentless, punishing cold. Eliza clung to the saddle horn, her body numb, her mind a blank slate of endurance. The trust she had placed in Silas was no longer tentative. It was absolute, a lifeline in the churning void. He was her only compass, her only shield against the storm's fury. She could feel the shudder of the horse beneath her, the strain of its every step, and felt the strain in Silas's own posture as he leaned into the wind, a human bulwark against annihilation. He did not falter. He did not slow. He just kept moving forward, pulling them through the white maw of the blizzard. Just when she thought she could endure no more, that her frozen limbs would simply give way, a dark shape loomed out of the swirling snow. The cabin. Small, low-roofed, and solid, it looked like it had grown from the earth itself. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. Silas led the horse into the meager shelter of a lean-to, his movements still efficient despite what must have been his own exhaustion. He helped her down from the saddle, his hands firm on her waist to steady her frozen legs. For a moment, she leaned against him, too spent to stand on her own, and felt the solid strength of him, the heat of his body a stark contrast to the deathly cold. The moment was brief, but it was one of profound safety. Inside, the cabin was a single room, stark and simple. A stone hearth, a rough-hewn table, a bed built into the wall. It was the space of a man who owned little and needed less. But it was warm. A fire was already laid in the hearth, waiting for a match. With a practiced hand, Silas brought it to life, and as the flames licked up the kindling, casting a warm, dancing glow across the room, the terrifying howl of the wind outside seemed to recede. The shelter was absolute. He moved about the small space, lighting a lantern, taking a pot to the stove. He did not fuss over her, but his awareness of her was constant. He handed her a tin mug of coffee, strong and black and scalding hot. The heat burned a path down her throat, chasing away the deep, internal chill. She sat on a simple wooden stool near the hearth, the borrowed blanket still around her shoulders, and watched him. He moved with a quiet grace, his self-sufficiency a world away from the feckless promises of the man she had followed west. He had saved her life, without question or expectation. The storm raged outside, a wild beast trying to claw its way in, but inside the small cabin, a profound quiet had fallen. It was a quiet filled with the crackle of the fire, the lingering scent of coffee, and the unspoken reality of their shared ordeal. The armor of her grief and fear had been stripped away by the storm, leaving behind a raw, vulnerable core. But in its place, a new feeling was taking root, a deep, quiet gratitude. Silas finally stopped his movements and stood across the room, his shadow long against the wall. He looked at her, his gaze direct and serious in the firelight. The silence stretched, filled with all that had happened and all that remained uncertain. He had given her shelter from the storm, but the larger storm of her life remained. He seemed to understand this. He took a breath, the sound soft in the warm room. "The pass will be snowed in for a week, maybe more," he began, his voice a low rumble. "When it's clear, I can take you to Benton, the next town over. Or—" He paused, and she felt the weight of his next words before he spoke them. He looked not at her finery, but at her hands, clasped around the warm mug. He saw the person, not the predicament. He breathed the words, so quiet she almost felt them rather than heard them. "I'll take you home, if you'll let me." Home. The word was a complex, painful chord. The home she had known was gone forever. The home she had dreamed of was a lie. He did not mean back east. He did not mean the town down the tracks. His eyes flickered around the small, sturdy cabin, to the hearth, to the shelter he had built with his own hands. He was offering her not a destination, but a beginning, a place to stand and face the world, not alone, but beside him. In his offer, there was no pity, only a simple, profound respect. He was offering her a choice, a chance to forge a new life from the ashes of the old one. Eliza looked from his steady gaze to the fire, its light a symbol of the life he had preserved. The storm outside was a reminder of the world's cruelty, but the warmth within was a testament to its unexpected grace. She had lost everything she thought she wanted. But here, in this remote cabin with this quiet stranger, she had found something she never knew she needed. A strength she did not know she possessed, and the tentative, fragile promise of a place to belong. A slow nod was her only answer, but in the quiet warmth of the cabin, it was more than enough. It was everything,